situation. Just give me a name. What would be your status?
Well, as you can hear, we are gathering for spiritual alchemy. We're going to wait just a couple more minutes for a couple more people to show up. So as we are just waiting for a couple more people to show up, we appreciate you hanging out with us and watching in. My name is brotherT. I'm the facilitator for our gathering tonight, Spiritual Alchemy. And we're just going to have some fun tonight. This is a very interactive conversation. And there is a chat available on the site. And while I don't have anyone that's available to respond to you tonight, if you want to put in questions or comments in the chat screen, I'll be able to respond to those next week when we gather next week. So looking forward to finding out what you might add to our conversation tonight. Thanks for joining us. We'll be with you in just a moment. And I'm brotherT for all of you out there, so thanks for joining in. The question that I wanted to pose tonight is about this guy that has had such a huge influence in our world, and some of you might be familiar with it. It goes by the name Jesus Christ, right? So I have something I want to read to you, and it's just a kind of I think an interesting overview of how we see Jesus in the world, if you will. And then we can just kind of unpack that and talk about what that means to you. And the reason I want to talk about it is because some people feel resistance to just even the name Jesus. I was doing another program, and I went online and there were some people that were doing videos about. They would just go up to people and say, what do you think of Jesus? Have you heard of Jesus? And the responses were just all over the place. Some people were like, are you kidding me? It's just crazy. Who would believe in that? And other people are just, their whole life is just committed to this idea of Jesus. Other people don't even like to hear the word, because there's some pain or there's something that's influenced them in their life from what they've learned through that name. And we know the history, of course, where wars literally were fought, in the name of Jesus, or however it was interpreted. So I just want to share this. Just takes a few minutes to read this. This is called the Manifest Christ, the Metaphysical Christ, excuse me. And this is from some of you might be familiar with Lee Carroll, who has been channeling. And I'll share this with you guys out there too. Almost everything that I present is what we call channeled work. Okay? And the reason I love channel work is because it's really fresh, it's very intense. It just does away with all the BS of our interpretations of what spirituality is, and it's so fresh for me, and it just takes me deeper and deeper and deeper to my own understanding and knowing of myself. So we're going to start here with the metaphysical Christ. In the Western world, known as the First World, which takes in all of the Americas and most of Europe, Jesus Christ is probably one of the best known names of all. To many, the name Jesus represents tremendous personal joy, and it'd be difficult to speak of him or discuss him without bringing up very strong feelings and emotions. This is as it should be. From the time most of us in the first world were old enough to understand anything we were told about Jesus. It didn't matter if you were a Christian or not, you knew about Jesus. It didn't matter if you were a Christian or not, you knew about Jesus. The poem One Solitary Life indicates that no other person who ever walked the earth had anywhere near the impact that Jesus did. Christmas in the first world, and we're right in the middle of it, right, is a very special time of year, anticipated by all. And if you're a Jew or any other non-Christian, you have to go out of your way to get around it. And almost everyone's bombarded by it. This makes Jesus' birthday the most special, well-publicized event of the entire year. The Jews are taught that the Messiah has not yet come, but will come in the future. And the Christians are assured that he has not only been here, but died for the sins of the world. And will be returning to set up a special world order. Unfortunately, though, through the last 2,000 years, hundreds of Christian sects developed, all with their own ideas of what Jesus said and meant, and how a human should live the good life of a true believer. It was common that each sect thought its own doctrine was more correct than the others, and that each had its own spiritual verification to prove its own claims. Some of the variations put emphasis on worshiping Jesus or Jesus' mother as much as him. Some put emphasis on what they felt were secrets that only believers could know, told only in secret ceremony to a select few people. Some felt that you had to sign up and make a commitment and join a group to be a believer. And some feel that it was good enough to just accept Jesus in your heart. Some felt that the prophets from 2,000 years ago were the only prophets that were valid. And some felt that the church still had ongoing prophets. One or two felt that there should be a supreme Christian leader, but the rest felt that local leaders were good enough. Some felt that only special men could communicate with Jesus, and that the common man had to go through the special ones, confessing wrongdoings to the special ones who could talk to God. And the special ones could never be women. Some felt that anyone could talk to Jesus directly. Some felt that only a handful of men would be chosen to be with him in the end, naturally from their sect. Some felt that slightly less than 200,000 souls would be chosen to be with him in the end, again from their own followers. Others felt that anyone who believed the correct way could make it, and then they carefully dictated what the correct way was. Some said that you couldn't be married to be a spiritual leader. Some said it didn't matter. Some said you couldn't live in Western society or have any money and be a leader. And some said it didn't matter. Others insisted that you had to believe that Jesus' birth was a miracle in order to worship him. He wouldn't listen otherwise. Others said it didn't matter, that anyone could worship him and he'd listen to anyone. Many of the original scripture meanings were verified from the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered recently. These very important writings have been sequestered for 50 years, however, and only certain authorized scholars from a certain group have been appointed to study these documents. A very few men still control who can see them. This soon can change, or this soon will change, with some startling revelations. It was very common to disagree about Jesus and what a human was supposed to do with his teachings. Almost without exception, however, everyone believed that Jesus was the representation of the essence of the love of God. He was love itself and had come to earth in a very special way, as a supernatural individual, to teach. No one who believed that Jesus had been here missed that part. However, the detail of what to do with that knowledge and which group to join was so intensely debated that many so-called holy wars were fought in the name of Jesus, and many innocent humans were killed because they were allied with the identified unbelievers. Even today, you have to be very careful in certain English-speaking countries in Europe when confronted by guards asking you which of the two Christian sects you might belong to. The wrong answer can still bring you harm. Explaining all this to a visitor just arriving from another planet might be something somewhat unsettling. Actually, explaining anything to a space visitor might be unsettling. Not to suggest that we'll be explaining this to a space visitor, but just as an example. And if that visitor happened to be knowledgeable on Earth history and culture and current events, it might be hard to justify the importance of Jesus. The visitor might bring up the fact that the majority of the human population of the Earth worships one or two other supernatural individuals. And although there are many sects represented here as well, there is a much better unification of how to worship God. Millions of humans are all unite to pray at the same time, give thanks to God, and go about their lives without the knowledge of Jesus at all. And the truly embarrassing part for Jesus' followers is that these others take their belief system with them in a way that is highly impressive. Spend some time with a Middle Eastern third world person for a while and compare how much time they give their worship or the sacrifices they endure. Spend some time with an Asian person and observe the same thing. Then with a modern first world Christian believer, the comparison will leave you with some highly poignant questions about faith. Of course, if you ask Christian leaders about this, they'll say that all the others, most of the Earth's population, are wrong, that they are heathens. And because they do not know Jesus, they are lost souls. It's up to the Christians to bring them to the good news about Jesus. The Christians are taught that God selected Jesus to come to earth and speak to only a very select group of European Caucasians, living in a section of what we now call the Middle East. And this group, or those in it that believed him, had the task of carrying his message to the other 4 billion people around the globe in the span of time before he returns. The truly ironic thing about all this is that the others who do not, quote unquote, know Jesus worship their own supernatural individuals based on some of the very same premises that Christians use in their own worship of Jesus. In fact, unbelievably, some of the scriptures of these heathen believers are very similar to teachings of that of the Holy Bible. Most of the Sermon on the Mount and classic Old Testament commandments are clearly covered in principle and intent in all the other world writings. Some of them read as though they were lifted right out of the Christian scriptures, but some were written considerably before Jesus even arrived, and some during the missing years of Jesus' life. Strangest of all is the fact that the others believed that their teachers were also the representation of the essence of the love of God, and that they had also come to earth in miraculous ways as supernatural individuals to teach and do miracles while on this earth, just like the Christians felt about Jesus. By the way, if you ask those others, Christians are the heathens and the unbelievers. And be very careful not to write a book that might disagree with them. They might hunt you down and kill you. Next week, I want to talk about metaphysical beliefs and how Jesus is involved in metaphysical belief systems. But what I want to ask you now is, what say you? If you guys don't remember.
That's a hard question.
Jesus, that's a hard question.
Well, there's a really good article in National Geographic this month about Jesus and the Bible and the
Dead Sea Scrolls?
And how the Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church split at the 1050 mark, and then the Protestants split from the Catholic Church. So it's in National Geographic. I got like maybe half of it read, but it was really good.
Okay, very interesting. Anyone else? Comments about Jesus? How much has Jesus been an influence in your life? Early life or even now?
Jesus has been like a really confusing entity
Yes.
in my life.
Okay.
And I don't fully understand. I guess there are so many ways, as you just pointed out, to possibly find like salvation through him. But there's always I don't know. The question I've always asked to very Christian people is what Jesus is to them. Because I don't know. I don't know. Was he just this man who supposedly performed miracles, or is he, in a lot of ways, he was that way to live your life and to be perfectly aligned and in flow in the universe. So I don't know. He's an enigma to me. I don't really understand it.
I'm so happy. You're in the right place.
Okay.
We're going to talk about that a little bit. Anybody else?
One of the things I've noticed is that it seems like most groups of people believe that they're superior to everyone else and that their way is the only way. And so I just think that's really interesting because the Bible talks so much about non-judgment and nobody really follows that.
Okay, interesting point. Here's something I want to share with you. Jesus said this in a recent channeling. But I'll ask the question. What's the number one killer today? What's the number one killer? People? Most people might say heart disease or cancer, right? Or other people, war, accidents, right? Here's a little twist. Jesus says the number one killer is self-righteousness. So what is self-righteousness to you? I think that's kind of what you were referring to.
Yeah.
These groups of people begin to believe that their way of seeing Jesus or even a spiritual path is the only way. And that's really been the history, if you will, of the teaching of Jesus through the Christian church, is that he said, I am the way, I am the light. And I don't remember the verse in the Bible. Only through me, basically, yeah. Only through Jesus can you find salvation. So let's spin it back a little bit.
Well, how do we know the Bible's true, though? You know what I mean? It's been interpreted for 2,000 years. So how do we even know that it's a viable history book?
That's a great question. So here's my answer, John. But you have to take what you will from it right? For yourself, of course. I tell people, and I insist on this, okay? Don't believe a word I say. Find out for yourself. Find out for yourself. But one of the reasons I like channeled work so much is because I tested and tested and tested and tested and tested and tested, and I can't find, it never fails.
Who's channeling it though? Are you channeling?
I channel sometimes.
Right.
I have a connection, and we'll talk about that a little bit.
Right.
But it's really not about me. We're all channeling all the time. You just may not be conscious of it. And most people don't recognize it as channeling. They call it their intuition. You know, I had this intuitive thought today to pick up this thing on my way out the door to get that extra key. I don't even know why I did it, but when I got through my day, I realized, I needed that. And if I didn't pick it up, I go, I should have gotten that. And it's just a little hit, just this little, we call it intuition. But it's really a communication, if you will, and I'm going to describe it as your higher self or your divine self, right? But we all are channeling. The question is what you're willing to allow more than what you're willing to believe. Because if you'll allow this divine nature, this divine self that's within you to inform you, then you can know what you need to know on a moment-to-moment basis. And I've been studying through Jesus, so I'm going to start back with that. In 1965 to 1972, and some of you are familiar with this teaching called A Course in Miracles, right? So for extra credit, I've got a talk that I did a couple years ago out in this place. It's called Classroom. It's a called Google Classroom. And I've set that up for everyone here, right? And you too. But if you want to take advantage of that, you go to classroom.google.com and learn a little bit about the classroom, and I'll give you a code if you'll give me your email address, right? And I wanted to set up a capture page where you could just go there and just fill it out, but I'll have that for you next week. But if you want to send me, or if somebody wouldn't mind passing around a piece of paper tonight, just give me your name and your email address. I will send you that code. So you go to classroom.google.com, right? And there, you'll have you enter that code, and it'll drop you into the classroom. I've added some content there. I've added some assignments, and I've added some other material. And it's a place where you can watch the material, and you can participate and give each other. We can communicate together as a group there, and you can give me feedback as well and ask questions. And then the next week we'll bring it up. So it's just a classroom online, and it's really kind of a high-tech way of being able to communicate more effectively, right? So I want to go back to A Course in Miracles. When I picked up A Course in Miracles, I thought, I'll share this for you, John, I thought my family would think that I'd lost my mind, right? Because it was counter to everything that my family today still pretty much is committed to, you know. And it really flew in the face of what I had been introduced to as a child. But as a child, once I got to the point where I could drive the car, which was not much past the age of 12, right, back in the day, I could go where I wanted to go and where I didn't want to go. And where I didn't want to go was to church. Because I would see people, we were in the music business, and my parents were, my dad was, and they'd be playing music and getting drunk and partying and doing all that stuff on Friday night. And then Saturday night it'd be even bigger, right? And Sunday morning they'd be riddled with guilt and hungover and hating life. And then they'd want to go to church, and then we'd go to church, and then I'd see those same people in church begging for forgiveness for how they'd been acting on Friday night and Saturday, right? So I couldn't reconcile that. And then there was something about a judgmental God that would punish my brothers and sisters, and we had a fairly large family, so for a God that would punish that wouldn't love my brothers and sisters as much as my parents did, or as much, and no matter what I did, as an example, my grandmother, I knew for certain that no matter what I did, I'm not saying she would agree with what I would do, but no matter how horrific it was, she wouldn't quit loving me. And the last thing she would want me to do would be to suffer in eternity, for all eternity. So see, none of that made any sense to me. I couldn't reconcile that. So I just turned the wheel and went in a different direction. And so I was really blessed that I didn't have a lot of decades of indoctrination. And I say that I was really blessed truly because then I didn't have that bag and baggage to deal with. I don't have it to deal with today. So my idea, and I've shared this with some of you, but I'll share it again. My idea was whoever had the most money would win the race, so to speak, right? Because the people that had the most money seemed to have the easiest life, right? And so that's kind of what I dedicated myself to. So climbed the corporate ladder, did the things I needed to do, and at one point, was doing pretty well by most world standards. I was on the way up, so to speak, and doing quite well. Envious of some people would be envious of my status. And I bought this book by Vernon Howard called A Rich Man's Secret because I thought it was going to teach me how to make more money, right? But Vernon was a pretty tricky guy. And Vernon Howard was teaching spiritual principles. And I later discovered it was Zen philosophy. And Zen philosophy, the principles or the teachings of Buddha, were very, very pure. And one of the reasons it was very pure is because Buddha traveled around for 40-something years teaching after he had an experience of what we call enlightenment, right? And so he taught those principles for a long time. And so that his teaching stayed very pure, and he was teaching 600 years before Jesus showed up on the scene. Jesus, on the other hand, was like 3 years, but he had a really big crescendo on the end, the crucifixion thing. Everybody's got that down, right? And so that he was, elevated very quickly because of that demonstration. And while what I was reading that, some people believe that only prophets back then were valid, and other people believe that, there are prophets now. What's really happening? What's really happening is that we are growing up, if I can use that expression. Our minds are beginning to open up. We're beginning to let go of false ideas. We don't have to go too far back in history when we literally believed that the earth was flat. And I don't think anybody, at least maybe in this audience, would think that that's the case today, right? And you don't.
I've heard it explained that it's just a parallel reality.
It's a parallel reality, right?
So that's why there's so much energy behind it that people really believe it, because at some level it's true.
Sure. Well, on some level, we could say that, and truly no matter what you say, here's an interesting thing that I discovered. No matter what you say, at some level of consciousness, you're right. At some level of consciousness. So if I can shift my consciousness, I begin to see the truth of things. I begin to see things in a new way. You don't believe the things that you did when you were in the first grade. You're no way are you afraid of the things that you were afraid of in the first grade. You shifted your consciousness because you grew through experiences and realized that the things you were afraid of in the first grade, you didn't need to be afraid of at all. But you didn't know it when you were in the first grade. You had to graduate to a higher level of understanding. I call let me say it again. I call enlightenment, spiritual knowledge. Enlightenment is not something that happens to you. It is the result of you working and doing the things you need to do to remove the obstacles to the awareness of yourself, your true self, your higher self, the self that Jesus discovered. So when we talk about Christ and Christ consciousness, we're really not talking about Jesus, the personage. We're talking about a consciousness. And so I want to go back to this idea of the story of the Garden of Eden, or in the beginning, because in one of the books that came through the Dead Sea Scrolls was the book of Thomas. You guys, anybody familiar with that? Yes. The scripture, Thomas' scriptures, right? And in there, Thomas was just scribing what Jesus would say. So this is one of the purest teachings of Jesus' time. So he didn't try to embellish it or change it or whatever. Jesus said this, and he would just write down. And Jesus at one point had his disciples and the people around him, were asking him, so when will we know the end? When will we know we're at the end, right, of this journey, of this salvation? And they had the idea that Jesus was going to lead them into salvation. And a lot of people still believe that, right? That he's going to come back, the second coming, that he's going to come back and he's going to fix everything and yada, yada, yada. So when will we know that we're near the end or we're at the end? And Jesus said, so, you're at the beginning then? So the Gospel of Thomas Jesus was pointing us back to the beginning. And if we really begin to unpack what was shared in the Course in Miracles, it really kind of bends our mind because it's so radical that a lot of people just put the book down and said, they can't handle it. Not that they can't handle it, they don't want to handle it, right? We have a resistance to truth. And that part of us that's resisting truth is the part of us that doesn't want to give up control. It doesn't want to give up its idea of truth. But I got some bad news for that self. That self is a self we created. It's a self that's really kind of insane. In fact, A Course in Miracles tells us it's quite insane, right? And so, people ask the question, does an insane person know they're insane? No, not really.
That's an insane question.
That's an insane question. So,
Well, Buddha said, I just read it last night in the team's room, Buddha said, you are a result of all that you have thought.
that's right.
That was Buddha's statement.
That's right. That's right. And what that points to, John, is a spiritual principle that I share a lot, and we're just going to talk about 2 or 3 tonight. One of them is thoughts are things. If you were created by God, let's go back to the beginning, right? Then you are an idea in the mind of God. And the mind of God, those ideas are only thoughts of love. So you are love itself. You are an idea in the mind of God, and of course the Miracle says, ideas leave not their source. So you're still right where you've always been, an idea in the mind of God, right?
Who's God?
Ah. When's the last time you looked in the mirror?
Okay, so I'm God.
You are?
Well, you have a white beard
Answer
and
that
long
question.
hair.
That's a little strange, right? But let's take it to another level so that maybe we can grasp that question, because that's a very, that question's,
It's mind-blowing.
it's mind-blowing, and we've created, we've been at war about this question.
Well, you look at the stars at night, and you look at everything, and you just go, you can't comprehend it all.
Yeah,
You
right.
just can't.
So I want to share this for your benefit, John, because we might have shared it last week or like a couple of weeks ago, but how many of you have been able to teach your cat how to drive your car? Only 1 out of 7, or 8, or 9. You can talk to your cat all day long. You can tell him all about how the engine runs, how everything works. Why can't your cat learn how to do that?
Right.
Why? Why not?
Well, he doesn't have the capacity, he doesn't have fingers.
Thumbs.
Well, even if he could physically do it,
Thumbs, that's it.
even if he could physically do it, he doesn't have, it's contextually beyond its capacity to comprehend it, right? So if we look at the self that we've created, and we've created it, and we'll talk about it as making ourselves up. If we look at this self, we can simply see that we have made up our idea of who and what we are, and we are projecting that out on the world and getting other people to agree with who we are trying to present, withholding back what we don't want them to know about us, of course, right? But trying to get them to agree to the image that we're projecting out. And we're making it all up. This is who I am based on my history and how many other people I can get to agree with what that is. This little mind, and I call it the cat mind, okay? Because you can't teach the cat to drive the car, and I like to say you can't even teach it to scoop its poop, right? And even that's a pretty simple thing, you know. You can talk to it all you want, but it can't grasp it. This little mind that we've made up is, I call it the cat mind. It's really another word that we can use would be called the ego self. It's the sliver of intelligence. And I say sliver because it's really a very, very poor servant of you. But the world focuses on intelligence. The world focuses on the power of how smart we are and our intelligence, and we literally idolize people that we think are highly intelligent and so forth, right? But it's just a sliver of intelligence. It actually doesn't know anything. This ego self is like the cat. it can't really contextually grasp what you are, the very thing that you are, this idea in the mind of God, that you and God are one. You are a creation of love, therefore you are love, and you're the idea, the very idea of love, and you are expressing that as self, as God. Your higher self expresses that. So, how did we get here? How does this all work? So, what I've learned, and I'll share with you, is that it's almost like kids when they're playing together and they go play by themselves and the parents aren't around. Who do they emulate? The adults, exactly. They pretend to be adults. They play at being adults. And here you are, playing, pretending at being God. And what does God get to do?
Everything.
Anything He wants to. It's called free will. You get to decide when you leave here tonight whether you're going to go left or right. Now, the potential may be that you're going to go right. But when you get right there to the point of decision, you might decide, because you have free will, no matter how many people want you to go to the right, you might decide, I'm going left. And there you go. You have free will. In this experience, or if you will allow me to say, in this illusion of separation from what you really are, you're pretending to be something that you're really not. But you're so convinced that you are what you've created to yourself to be, and you get everybody else to agree with what you're projecting, that this whole experience seems to be absolutely real, right? So when we go back to the beginning, what really happened is that you and I, and about 7 billion other people currently, are pretending to play a game called separation. And in this game of separation, we have separated ourselves away from the idea of what we are. Now that sounds pretty far-fetched, but you do it every day. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Every night you go to sleep, and now we would all agree that you're safe at home in bed, right? You go home, you go to bed, hopefully, John, I don't know, but maybe, right?
Pretty safe.
You're safe at home in bed. But when you go to sleep, you create an entire world, a universe, out of what? Nothing. It's all made up. But all night long, it's like another sliver of mind. You separate yourself out one more level, your mind. It's all mind. You're safe at home in bed, and you have no idea that you're safe at home in bed. And this little self is journeying through dramas, chaos, doing all kinds of things. Sometimes bad dreams, sometimes good dreams, sometimes dreams about sex, sometimes dreams about wanting sex, sometimes doing crazy things, sometimes feeling threatened, sometimes feeling glorious. There are times when I'll find myself literally hovering over the ground. I can fly.
I do that too.
You do that too. You see, nothing is impossible. In a dream, all things are possible. And it's so convincing. We have just a little sliver of mind, and it's so convincing, just this little bit of mind is so convincing in this universe that it makes out of whole cloth. There's nothing really there, that it has no idea that the real you is still safe at home in bed, right? Now here's the twist though. The real you, if you want to call yourself real, is along for the ride. When you wake up, you remember the dreaming self, right? But it has no idea of you. You're like this higher level self. And you're there all night experiencing the dreams, and you can remember them for a few minutes, but right after you wake up, they just begin to fade because it was all just made up crap. But that little self that you sleep with, that you use to journey with while you're asleep, so you're never truly asleep. Or we could say you're always sleeping. You're still dreaming right now. Yes, ma'am.
I have to say, since these classes, I've started having a couple lucid dreams.
Awesome.
I know I'm in a dream, but I always think of you in the lucid dream because I'm like, Tony said this isn't real. I'm like, this is so cool. I'm like, it looks real. And it's not real. And Tony told me it's not real. And then I'll wake up. And I feel like when you start to, I feel like that in the real world, when I start to look at things like, this isn't real. This is me playing at separation. Then I start to wake up. And I'm doing that in my dreams, which is annoying because I really
It is annoying.
sleep. And in the middle of the night, I'm waking up and I'm like, damn it, Tony.
People cuss me all the time. I'm used to it. So, I had a lucid dream, and thanks for sharing. I had a lucid dream one time, and I used to be in the Navy. And so, and I think I might have been in the Navy in past lives. And I think a lot of the dreams that I have, and maybe yours too, I'll have experiences of being on merchant ships out on the seas, high seas. I've never been on a merchant ship in my life, or this life. But I mean, very, very vivid dreams of the spaces in the engineering quarters and stuff like that. And I've never been anywhere near those kind of places. In the Navy, it was in just some specific type of vehicle, or ship. But the point is that I was having this dream about I was in a pier, and there were Navy vessels, and so I was going from this back of this one ship to this next one that was right there, and I see the lines coming over from the bow or from the pier where they were tied off and stuff. And so, but I saw this. It was almost like the back of a whale that was in the water between the two ships. And I thought, oh, I can just walk on that. So I, how dreams are, right? You can do anything. Right? So I just stepped down on this, and it's like this bladder, and it just moves with me. And I'm like, oh, this is really cool. And I'm walking over, and like, I'm not doubting that there's any, I'm believing it's all real. I mean, this is not strange. This is totally normal. And I get to this next vehicle, and I'm up on the next ship now. I'm on the deck on the next ship. And there's some sailors there. And suddenly this young man, maybe about your age, John, and he comes up to me, this sailor, and he just starts talking to me. And suddenly I woke up. Okay, so a lucid dream is being awake while you're in a state of dream. Okay, you're sound asleep, but suddenly you are conscious that you're not awake. You're conscious that you're in a sleeping scape. I call it sleepscape. But you're in this landscape, if you will, that you've created, and you constantly suddenly realize that, wait a minute, you return to the higher self in that moment, this real self, if you want to call it that, and this self now realizes it's in this dream. And so I'm looking at this sailor, and I thought, this isn't real. And his face started changing colors and stuff, and I'm going, this is, I'm dreaming. This is cool, I'm dreaming. And I had the thought, he doesn't even know who he is. He doesn't even know what his name is. And that's the thought I had in my dream, right? And so I looked at the sailor and I said, I'm playing now. And I said, well, what's your name? He goes, and I laughed, and I'm like, this is wild. I said, what's your name? I'm being persistent now. And he goes, he couldn't say his name. And I had the thought, and I said, I don't know where the idea came from, where the thought came from, but I had the thought, he doesn't even know he's from Portland, Oregon. And no sooner did I have the thought that he blurted out, I'm from Portland, Oregon. You see, everyone you meet in your dreams is you. You give them all the thoughts that everything they're communicating back to you. You think that's a separate person out there in your dreams at night?
It would have to be you because it's your mind.
It's only you there, right? Because this little sliver of self that you've peeled off, right?
Do you ever feel like an entity or something comes in though? I mean, I've had times where maybe I wasn't completely asleep, and all of a sudden you feel this presence come in, and then.
Does it feel scary and evil?
No, but it's kind of scary because you don't recognize it.
Wow.
And then all of a sudden it's there and gone.
Okay.
But maybe, yeah.
Well, we are told now, okay, that, and this is something that we're all conditioned with, right? The church, if you will, I'll use the name loosely here, not to be specific. The church really has tried to indoctrinate all of us that we could be possessed, right, by this entity called the devil, or some representation of the devil, something that could possess us. And so we've been told that that's the truth, and we've been told to be fearful and to be very careful to keep our mind closed. Okay, now don't meditate, because if you meditate, you may put yourself in a position where something can enter you and possess you. Okay, and that is a lie. That's a lie. That's a flat-out lie.
The only possession I ever get is happy, peaceful love.
Happy and peaceful love, right? And that's the higher self. That's your true nature, because you are love, right? Because God is love, and you're an idea of love. So that's just the true self.
That's what they want to scare you away
they want to scare you away from doing that, right? For whatever reason, because that's how they stay in power. And that's okay. That's their point.
You think it's a concerted effort on purpose, like the higher ups, like don't want us to know this stuff?
I am certain of that.
Right, the church
I'm absolutely
needs
certain
to
of
do
that. But that's
They already know it. They know
there are
it.
some at some levels that I believe do know that. And remember, this goes all the way back to Constantine in like 400 AD. And they burned all the books and, you know, the pagans and all that. They piled all the crap up and they burned everybody's stuff and said, this is the truth. And Constantine wanted to stay in power. He put his people in power in the church, and they developed the doctrine that we've been living with for the last 1,600 years.
And that's when Constantine took out reincarnation as
They took
what
all
was
that out.
formerly a
Yes.
principle that was accepted.
That's right. So
In the Bible? Or
It was
what?
accepted
It
as
was-
Christianity until Constantine deliberately politically removed it
yes,
because he didn't want the people who he was in charge of to think they had another, like, more chances to. He wanted them to just,
yeah. If you can,
to
yeah.
control.
If we can make people feel guilty or fearful, we can get them to do what we want them to do. We can torture them and do it that way, but that's expensive, right? And you got to have other manpower and whatever to torture people and to force people into slavery and whatever. And it's really better to just trick people into believing something, and then they do what you want them to do out of fear, and you're the way for their salvation. In other words, you save them from the very fear that you've indoctrinated them in. I want to go back to this point, though, that you've raised, John, is that absolutely we have, all of us, I'll just share this with you, and don't believe anything I say, right? Find out for yourself. But we all have guides, right? And everyone has at least 2, if not actually 3 guides continuously throughout your life, right? But there are points in time of raising your consciousness when there can be, if you'll allow me to say, a changing of the guard, so to speak, right? But they're looked at, if you will, in the terms, we could say angels, right? That's a term that I think most people are comfortable with, that we all surrounded by angels. But it's because you have forgotten that you're an angel yourself, right? We're all the same. Everything's just a part of this Christ consciousness that God created.
Why
Yeah.
are we given guides?
Why are we?
Given guides. I mean, if our higher self, if we can connect to that anytime, why do we need some?
The ego is the ego, the small self, the cat mind is just so damn stupid that we do crazy things. We jump out of airplanes that are perfectly good airplanes. We go camp out in the Arctic, you know. We do crazy things. And so there you have a guides that are trying to help you to kind of shepherd you to keep from killing yourself.
But do you have to ask them to intervene, or do they just, because I've heard, you have guardian angels, but you have to invite them. to help
Absolutely.
you. They won't, they're not allowed to if you don't ask them to,
And do you-
I mean.
Do you know why they're not allowed to? That's a great
Is there
question.
free will?
Because you have free will. And you are created in free will, and you cannot be a victimized. Here's the question. Our whole judicial system is built around this idea of justice, right? And it's built of this idea of people being victimized by other people who are perpetrators, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? But God created you as spirit, if you allow me to say that, and God created you perfect. There's nothing to fix. There's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to do there. But the small self that separated itself, having this illusion of separation, believes itself to be vulnerable, believes itself to be potentially victimized. And the whole structure is built on a foundation of fear, right? The whole structure, and it's a thought system. So there's they are basically 2 thought systems. One is a thought system of the world, and we'll call that the thought system of ego, the personality self, right? And the whole foundation is like you put on these glasses, and these glasses, everything you see is through a prism of fear, right? It colors everything. Fear colors every experience that you have as the separated self, the individual separated small cat mind self, right? The other true self, because just like you couldn't take all of yourself into that dreaming self at night, it's just a little sliver of you. You couldn't take all of yourself into this illusion. This is a dream. in the Course in Miracles, Jesus simply, and the Course in Miracles, for anybody that doesn't know, is a channeled work from Jesus, okay? So if you can get past that, right, in this teaching, he simply says, you're always in a state of dreaming. But there is a part of your mind then, right? This is just a little sliver of your intellect, just a little sliver of the mind of knowing. And it's all made up concepts. And so then, if you will, the true self, we'll call it the Christ consciousness, we'll call it the mind that Jesus was able to connect with and sustain in his physical embodiment of that consciousness. That's why he was known as the Prince of Love, right? God, the God self, the self of love, the presentation of love. It's because he said, when you see me, you see the Father. He was referring, and using the language of that time was very patriarchal, right? He could just, as far as he was concerned, I'm sure he would have just said, when you see me, you see the mother, right? Because he had no rule. He knew that gender was illusion as well, because that's just another separation, right? We separate ourselves out into female and male. One more step of separation. But you're not either one of those things. In reality, you're pretending to be human. You're pretending to be a woman. You're pretending to be a man. And yes, reincarnation was very prevalent for thousands and thousands of years and well indoctrinated, well believed and taught. And then at that time, as you pointed out, at that period of Constantine, they wiped out as much of the truth as they could and kept what they needed to keep us in control. And it worked really good, and it's still working 2,000 years later. Well, 1,600 years later. Right? So the small self then is just a sliver of mind.
So Jesus was almost like a lucid dream of God.
A lucid dream in the physical, yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And so are you. So you and Jesus are just like you and me.
Right.
Right? We are both ideas in the mind of God. In the mind of God, there is absolutely no separation. Right? So how can we experience that? We can experience that by looking within at the different aspects of the small self. Right? So I can share a couple of with you that you're familiar with. And we do a workshop called Journey to Infinite Self. And I'm hoping to do that soon, and maybe some of you can join me with that. It's called Journey to Infinite Self. But I'll take you through a journey of really identifying with these different aspects of your mind. But I'll share a couple with you. Let's see what time it is. Yeah, we're good. So if I wanted to speak to a particular aspect of you, I'm going to ask to speak to a particular aspect of you, okay? And when I do, I want you to assume that self because you know the self quite well. And when you do, I want you to adjust your position in your chair. I want you to take the posture of that self, okay? So I want you to, and then I'm going to ask you who I'm speaking to, and if you agree, if you're really being that self, expressing that self, then you can just answer yes, okay? So let's just play and try it, okay? I would like to have permission, please. Can I please speak to the controller? I see everybody's positioned themselves quite differently, right? Who am I speaking to? The controller. What's your purpose as the controller? To what?
Spread love.
Spread love? The controller?
Keep the body safe.
Keep the body safe. Are you just responsible for the body?
Mind.
Now, who am I speaking to?
Control.
Okay, who are you speaking as? The controller? Okay, express the controller. Are you only responsible for this body of this person, Laurel?
I'm in charge of everything.
You're in charge of everything. The controller's in charge of everything. And everybody else, by the way. Don't you tell other people what the hell they better do? Isn't that your purpose as the controller? You're supposed to control everything so that you can keep the self safe. Keep the self safe. Thank you. That's your job, right? And you as the controller control all the other aspects of this self and only let them come forth when you allow that to happen. So thank you for allowing me to speak to you, but I'm going to ask you to give me some permission. May I please speak? And when I ask this question, I want you, if you agree and you'll let me do this, controller, then I'm going to ask you to assume the position. Adjust yourself in your seat again. I'm going to ask you to assume the position of that self. I please would love to speak to, can I please speak to the skeptic?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
So are you adjusted to are you taking the position now as a skeptic? Physically? Who am I speaking to? Say the skeptic if that's who I'm speaking to. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. What's your job as a skeptic? Am I speaking to the skeptic?
My job is to question.
And why would you question?
Stay safe.
Stay.
Safe, that's a good one. Yeah.
To give the controller something to control.
To give the controller something to control, right?
I feel like my skeptic wants to belong.
It wants to belong, wants to make sure that
Yeah, nothing crazy can come in.
nothing crazy. Don't jump out of the damn airplane. The skeptic is railing when you're about to step outside of a perfectly good airplane. It's like, you really believe that parachute's going to open? Right? You really think you should go to that class because they're going to talk about all this stuff? You really believe what you're hearing? And I'm pretty sure the skeptic has already been present several times tonight, have you not?
Right. There's a lot of fear associated with this.
Fear, right? So anytime we're looking at fear, any aspect of you that's an aspect of fear, the aspect of the ego, you can be assured that it's fear-based because the ego is only seeing everything through the eyes of fear, right? So if I might please then return to the controller, can I please speak to the protector? Everybody adjusted in their seats to the protector. Who am I speaking to?
Protector.
What's your purpose?
Keeping safe.
To keep who safe?
Me.
To keep this body safe, this self safe, this personality safe? And your family, and your children, and anybody and everybody around you?
The world.
And how do you do that? What's your method of keeping the self safe?
Control skepticism.
Controlled skepticism. It's really a handoff. It's like one of those relay races, and they keep passing the baton to the next person. It's like that. You have these personality selves.
It never ends, probably.
It ends with the control. The controller is the dominant self
Right.
in the whole lineup of these aspects of the self, right? The small self.
How is a controller different than the protector? That's both the same.
Well, in the workshop, we really drill down, and I've got a whole long series of questions. You'll begin to see that there absolutely is. And so there's other aspects of you, like the injured child, right? Or the innocent child, right? Or the young man, or the old man. Or, I'm sorry.
Old man, look at my life.
I'm a lot like you, yeah. So the thing is that all of these aspects arise from the prism of fear. But then I want to ask you to, can I speak to the controller again, please? Say yes?
Yes.
Okay, may I please speak to, and adjust in your seat when you get there, may I please speak to the infinite self?
Wow.
Please assume the position of the infinite self. Who am I speaking to, please?
The infinite self.
Do you see any boundaries?
No.
Do you see any obstacles? Do you notice any fear? So you just connected with your higher self. I got cold chills. And it only takes a moment for the controller to relax, for you to be able to step into a mind that's so expansive and so free. I am free. I am free. I am free. That nothing in the material world can ever hold you back, contain you, have any influence on you whatsoever, unless you give power back now to the small controller, the small self, the sliver of mind.
So Jesus knew how to be the infinite self. He knew how to be infinite. He knew how to be one.
He literally, I'll try to explain this, and it's not because we're trying to get the cat to drive the car. And so even speaking the language, the cat can't understand it when you say turn the ignition. It's like, really? What the hell? Feed me. All I care about is food. It can't comprehend the language. So it's really hard for us to use words, which are a very, very poor way of communicating, to express something that's infinite and limitless. And even those words are limiting. But we'll say it this way. The ego self is like the dreaming self, right? You experiencing it, you're knowing it because you're experiencing it every day, every day, every day, every night. You wake up and you realize that you were just having a dream. And here's the good news. Dreams have no effect, period. They have no effect. Dreams have no effect. They're just illusion. Nobody really got hurt. You really weren't having sex with anybody at all. It wasn't happening.
Oh, man.
Really? Nobody got hurt. Nobody was killed. And you really weren't threatened. And when you wake up, you can immediately know that because you see the illusion for what it is. But when you're in the illusion, you can't see its unreality. It's very convincing. Your mind is very convincing when you set yourself to it.
So what if you have a dream that you get a message from? Or you have a dream about something that's going to happen or whatever, and then it happens. So what is that?
What you're seeing is you're peeking under the veil and you're simply seeing potentials. You might take a right when you go out here, but you still have free will. And you could be a psychic and say, well, I see this for you, and I see this for you, and I see this for you. And if that person really believes it and makes a commitment to it, then when at the point of decision, they will just relinquish decision and they'll go ahead and follow that pathway, whatever it may be, right? But as long as you have free will, you always can change whatever the potential is. The potential was that we would annihilate ourselves by now. But we have shifted our consciousness to such a high level, thank goodness, thank you, that we've shifted our consciousness just in the last 50 years to such a degree that we have literally averted a collapse or catastrophe for our entire planet. And now we're in a new place where no psychic has ever been able to see beyond 2012. Because now we're in a new place where the potentials weren't even there. So you have total freedom now that you've never had before. That's good news for you out there, right? You have the ability now to literally choose any pathway you want to. But you also have the ability now to raise your consciousness exponentially very, very quickly, which in the past, it was very difficult for us to do. And only a very few very, very dedicated people to a spiritual path were able to achieve higher levels of consciousness.
Why is that? Why are you saying, if we've always been infinite, the infinite self, why haven't we always been able to do that?
Because we graduated from the first grade now to about the second grade. We've begun to have more spiritual knowledge. Enlightenment is spiritual knowledge, okay? And as we're sharing more and more spiritual knowledge with each other, and it's not just us, more and more work is coming through, channeled work. Started with A Course in Miracles for me. Others of you have been listening maybe to Abraham Hicks and some other teachers like that. But in the last 10, 15 years, it's like the floodgates are open. But they're all teaching the same thing. And that was the big question I have for you tonight. Are you afraid to follow the teachings of Jesus, or would you like to take another pathway? It's still the same curriculum. Jesus wasn't the only enlightened being, and he wasn't the only one that was teaching the truth. The truth is true, and nothing ever changes it. Nothing can change what God has created you to be. Nothing. But you have to return to yourself. And if we'll let the word Jesus, or an idea of this personage called Jesus, keep us from learning about ourselves, then we're just handicapping ourselves. And so I don't want to introduce you to the teachings of Jesus, who are radically different, which is radically different than what has been taught to us before, but it's exactly the same as I can teach you through other teachers, that maybe you don't get tripped up on this idea of Jesus. But eventually, ultimately, you'll wake up to the realization that it's the same. Cover them all, because you'll come full circle. You'll come full circle, and then if we start with another teacher first here in spiritual alchemy, I promise you that within 2 years, when we crack the book on Jesus, and we will, if you stay with me, because you can't avoid it, because he's only teaching you the same thing. It's the truth, it's the truth, it's the truth. And when you read it, no matter who is sharing it with you, through whatever medium the truth is coming through today, it's still the same damn truth. And it knocks you back and you go. So I only want to get you to help me make a choice. So that when we dive into our first series of books, which we are going to do in January here in Spiritual Alchemy, that we're kind of tracking together, we're going to kind of start with the basics. We're going to go back to the beginning. We're going to start with the basics. How did we get here? What was it? What was the deal? And we've talked about it just a little bit tonight. We've been playing with a concept that you and I were just pretending to be separate, pretending to be children, pretending to be vulnerable, pretending to be human. Because in a dream, what's possible? Anything. The only problem with the dream we're having right now is that we're all in collusion in the dream. So if Grace decides not to agree with my idea of the way the dream is supposed to be, then there's going to be a film of resistance, right? And if enough people agree with Grace's idea instead of Tony's idea of the way things are supposed to be, I'm over here, the world sucks for me. Everybody else is happy, they're following Grace. I'm not getting my way. The ego's always trying to control everything. But I can't control you because you have, just like Grace, you have free will. So you get to do whatever you want to do. But in the dream at night, there's nobody in there but me, so I can do whatever I want to. But the guides and our teachers, and you have more than one or two, you have several. And as you graduate, so to speak, as you open up, and you can always, if you want to, you can say, Jesus, help me. How many billions of times has that been expressed? What if billions of people were praying to you? Don't you think your consciousness might... Yeah, just think about that.
Why do we have an ego?
Because we separated ourselves.
Yeah.
All right, we got a little time. I'm checking to see what time it is. How y'all doing? Are y'all still with us? Imagine that you are one with the mind of God. And you've heard this expression, Father, thy will be mine, right? Let my will be thine, right? In other words, let your thoughts be my thoughts. In other words, I'm tuning my radio into not only my thoughts, the jam I'm playing, but I'm turning all that off, and now I'm just tuning in and listening to thoughts that are other than mine. Father, thy will be done, right? That's saying you express yourself through me. In other words, you share your thoughts with me. I want to tune into your thoughts. There is an access point. For you, maybe it's the coming this way or this way. For me, it's up here. So when I do these things, I'm not even conscious. But for me, my access point to that higher self it's up here. When I'm meditating, when I connect with my higher self, it's there. There's just support that I discovered, and there it is. And we all have an access point. And that's the first part, right, is to get the mind to settle down, and meditation is a great way to do it. I don't know about you guys, but I actually use earplugs. I try to shut out everything so that I can really just focus in on my thoughts and then push them back and create a space so that I can have a communion, connection. It works. You've got to find yours. We all have to find ours individually. But then you will discover a thought will suddenly be, you'll be aware of a thought and you'll say, that wasn't my thought. Right? And that thought, that mind that you're connecting with is, if you will, the mind of your higher self, which is also communicating through the thoughts of love, the thoughts of God. God's thoughts are love.
Voice, right?
Yes, it is in your voice.
Yeah. So it's sometimes a little tricky, like, am I making that up?
Exactly. Sometimes it's hard to discern, right? But ask yourself, how do I feel, right? If I hear thought, is that my thought? Well, just ask yourself, was it a thought of love? Because it's you. And ultimately, we're going to talk about that transformation. When you hear me, you know, you're hearing the Father, if you will, if you want to use that term, or my higher self, whatever. Yes?
I want to talk more about the access point, because I feel like that's where I'm struggling. It's like, sometimes I can get to the access point, but it's not on a consistent basis, and it's sometimes confusing. Is that me or is it not me? Is that something we're going to be exploring a little bit more?
We are.
I'm missing component.
We are, and it was for me too for a long, long, long time. And then suddenly, one night, I I had an experience, and suddenly I realized that wasn't my thought. Are you still there? Are you there? And yes, right? One of the best ways to do it is just keep asking that question, right? Are you there? Yes. I get that, even before I can formulate the question, I get the yes. We're always connected. It's always present, right? But we have guys and we have our brothers and sisters, and even Jay says, anytime you want to, I'm always with you. I'm always with you. I'm always with you. What does that mean? That he's available. You don't even have to see it as a he, but this consciousness of love is always available to you. And if you have to frame it in the idea that it's Jesus for you to be comfortable and make that connection, then so be it. Whatever works for you, works for you. You might see it as a bumper sticker on the back of the car in front of you that gives you a flash of insight. Because it's about letting go of mind of the thoughts of the small self, which are always thoughts of fear. So you know what you're investing yourself in by looking at every thought and saying, is this a thought of fear? Or is this a thought of love? Right? And so we don't change our behavior changes because we've changed our mind. We've shifted from fear to love. And that small self can never be that mind. It can only relinquish its control and allow us to experience what is always there for us to experience. Right? So a miracle in A Course in Miracles is considered definitively, we'll just call it the definition of a miracle is a sudden shift of perception. Period. There's nothing else. It's a shift out of the mind of fear into the infinite self that's always available. And it's the mind of love. And it then begins to inform us. So the access point really is about us practicing to ignore, if I can use that term, the mind of fear. Because the one thing that it cannot, and here's the gift for the night, the one thing that mind cannot defend itself against is the power that you have to ignore it. You have the power to say, get thee behind me, shut up. Shut up. And it doesn't want to do that. It's like, what? No. You depend on me because I am the protector. I'm the skeptic. I'm the controller. I'm keeping your ass alive. I'm saving your life. You better listen to me. Blah, 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 blah.
So when people kill themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then what?
The question is, why would anybody want to stay here? This is hell. There's suffering, sickness, death, guilt, punishment, sacrifice, pain, all this bullshit. Why do you want to stay here? The question is really, why would people kill themselves? The question is, why would people want to stay here?
I like it here.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
Right, because you get to be in control. You get to play God. So if you want to let it go, now, granted, I think the general perception is the reason that people commit suicide or kill themselves is because they've lost their way or they're struggling or they're really suffering and they're just trying to escape. But everywhere you go, aren't you still there? Even in your dreams at night, you're still there. Even if you're the only one there, and it looks like a lot of people, but they're all you. It's just you. You're still there.
So why do you want to stay?
Because I kind of use this example.
Claudia's making him.
Claudia's making me. But because we are, all the aspects that we talked about tonight, just a few, we said the controller and the skeptic and the protector. We use those three, right? Aren't they all a part of you? Right? Not any one part of those aspects of yourself that you could literally separate off and just let it go. I mean, they're all a part of what you believe yourself to be, right? So when you wake up from your dreams at night, you're really reintegrating yourself and making yourself more whole. You're bringing back that sliver of self that you allowed to play in illusion all night long. But the bigger part of you is just reintegrating that, going, oh, that was nothing, and it goes about its new game for the day. The point is that you can't leave a part of yourself behind. And when you look around at your brothers and sisters, make no mistake, you're looking at yourself. So if a part of myself is asleep and refuses to wake up, I came back, just like you did, to help me wake up. Because as long as any part of me is holding on to an idea of fear as a reality, I can't fully wake up. You see, Jesus can't really be completely awake until you awaken, because you and God are one. And as long as any part of the mind is asleep, the rest of the mind is going, we got to get the rest of we got to wake ourselves completely up. And there's only 7 billion people to go. But it begins with you. It begins with you, and it ends with you. Because when you awaken from the dream, you see that the dream is just illusion, and it begins to, what we believe is happening over a series of thousands of years is just nothing, because time is illusion. It's a construct of only the sleeping mind. The ego itself is the only mind that's experiencing time, because it's such a poor intellect that it can't communicate and it can't express except by breaking experiences up into levels and lines and degrees, so that we can all say, oh, 7 o'clock on Thursday night, we're all going to go over here. But we are infinite, multidimensional, quantum beings, truly, but we've defined ourselves now as 3-dimensional. So we have lots of limits, and we need time to be able to sort through all this, because remember, the cat can't drive the car. And so it's parceled it out so it can begin to understand it, thinks it can control it. It can take little steps and go a little at a time and be okay, comfortable. Turn the blinker on, babe. Yeah.
But we do need our ego and ourself, to feed ourselves. I don't go off into a meditative state when I'm eating. You get your food and you eat it, and sometimes you need your ego to do that.
Well, that could be true, but it could be also just be a belief.
Yeah, maybe we got, maybe possible. If we get to that point where we don't need to eat.
There are people that express themselves as breatharians. Anybody heard that term?
Yes.
They don't eat. All the nutrients they need are just coming from that assumes that somebody needs to breathe. That's a lie too. It's just, where's your mind?
Our essence, yeah.
Right? So when Jay demonstrated that death isn't real and that the body can't die, and he reappeared, did that self need to eat? When he was just reprojecting himself, which is what you're doing right now, projecting yourself into an illusion. You're always in a state of dream. Until you wake up from the dream, you don't realize the dream is a dream.
So is that what death is? You wake up from the dream?
You go back to kind of a, how y'all doing out there? You kind of go back to, I don't like to use the term review, but you came here with a purpose. You came here with an intention of moving yourself along and others around you that you're in contract with, to kind of move the ball forward, to let go of this fear, let go of this fear, let go of this fear, to eventually wake up to the realization that there is absolutely nothing to fear, period. That's the awakened mind. And you came here to let go of those old fears that you made a commitment to in past incarnations, if you will, right? So you literally, and this is how I describe it, John, is that when Jay woke up, when he had his full-on experience of enlightenment, and the God self, if you will, he stumbled around in the woods for a few weeks, and he tells his story there's a book that was channeled by Tina Louise Spalding, and it's called Jesus, My Autobiography. I suggest that you would read it if you want to. You get extra credit. And he shares that experience that he had when John the Baptist baptized him. When he came up, suddenly, it's like the top of his head blew off, and he's like, oh, and he's just stumbling around, and he's like, he couldn't handle it. He couldn't handle anything or anybody. Remember, he's just like me and you. He had just practiced a practice that we're going to learn to do, where he began to raise his consciousness, but suddenly there was just a full-on enlightenment, right? Full-on. And what I describe that as, John, is like the ego just completely collapsed. And so do you need the ego to eat? Well, yeah, he couldn't even eat. Right. He finally, when he came out, stumbled back he went to his mom's first, because he was almost killed himself. Physically, right? Because he was having this experience of full-on enlightenment, direct communication, if you will, from God, from the high self.
Are you talking about the 40 days and 40 nights?
it wasn't, I don't believe that was kind of the stories that were made up around that.
But that's what you're talking about, is that time they were talking about?
That's what the stories, how the story's been manipulated a little bit and told.
I think the ego is what is needed to have us have any kind of individualistic.
Absolutely.
idea.
Yeah.
And then I think
Beautiful
that-
point.
I think then the enlightenment is always going to be that you get rid of the feeling that you're an individual and that the connection between all of us is gone. But I think it's necessary if we're all to be different ideas and experiences of God, that we need to have that individual piece to us in order to have these individual lives. Because if we all immediately felt that we were the same, then there'd almost be no different motion to go out.
Right.
And I had an image put into my head the other day. It wasn't a voice, but it was an image.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've been really kind of struggling with the idea that there is individualism, but there also isn't. And how does that, because the world does contradict itself, and I get that, but I was really looking for like a really solid way to think of it.
Mm-hmm.
And what the image that was put into my head was the image of cells, and how cells multiply like we do.
Mm-hmm.
And cell and self are
Mhm.
really close to each other. And even though they're separate cells, they're all part of the same organism.
Yes.
And so thus they are the same yet separate.
That's a great way of looking at it. One of the things that Jay shared with me that I really kind of stuck with, John, was he said, have you ever seen one of those, it's like a crystal ball hanging in a nightclub, and they shine the lights on it, and it's just a bunch of little mirrors, right?
Disco ball.
A disco ball, that's it. Well, imagine that's a diamond. Imagine a diamond with billions of facets, right? And every facet appears to be an individuation of a diamond. And if you were looking out, right, and you wanted to communicate with a facet that's on the other side of the diamond, well, you got to get, you got to get all around all these other people or all these other facets, and you got to get over there, whatever. It's very difficult, right? But all you really have to do instead of looking out is to look within. Because at the very center, if all the facets go to the center, right? So when you turn back to the center, then you realize your oneness. You look and appears to be an individuation. Yes, you're a special facet of this beautiful diamond. But at the same time, you're also one with all that is, that all of it that's being expressed. So to me, that was a very beautiful way of kind of seeing that, helping me to grasp, because that's a tough thing to grasp for me. How are we individuated, and at the same time, how are we one? But keep in mind, we're trying to use poor words or language, which provide us a poor means of understanding, and we're trying to teach this little mind something that it's not capable of really grasping. The only thing we can do is surrender it and access the point of communication, union, with our higher self, and then suddenly we get this inrush of knowing. So we go from understanding, if you will, or learning, to non-learning, then to unlearning, and finally to surrender, and ultimately we begin to just discover. We discover truth. We begin to know. And so there's no question, there's no ambiguity, there's no uncertainty, there's none of that stuff. There's only the knowing of truth as it is. And that can only be when you are expressing as your true self, which is not how we're expressing in our normal experience here. We literally have to, you can't just be you can't be, kind of pregnant. Right? You either are or you're not. And when you tap into this, then it becomes you. And this small self doesn't want to give up, because what happens to it? That's the only part of yourself that'll ever truly experience what we might define as death, because it's just made up. But you experience it every night. A small part of you, every night, when you wake up, that little self it's gone. You don't mope around and cry about it. Oh, it died. You don't go back in tonight and try to fix what went wrong last night. It's just bullshit. You don't need to worry about it. And you didn't get up because you killed somebody last night and turned yourself into the police. Right? Because you know it's illusion. And when you wake up from this illusion, you will know what the small self is trying to understand on its own, by itself. Right? Picking and choosing its ideas of what truth is and what truth isn't. And that's why we need help. And it's coming now through channeled work, through Jesus, through others. And I can't wait to explore more of this with you guys. And this is like going by way too fast, and we're out of time. Thank you guys for hanging out. And I'm going to turn off our streaming and in just a second. But let's take a good deep breath. So as we go forth this week, we simply ask the question, are you there? And we allow the answer to come. And we don't beat ourselves up if we're not hearing an answer. We allow ourselves to feel through this. This is not thinking. This is not any of that. This is turning to the heart and looking for that vibration. It could just be that you get cold chills. You get those little bumps on your arm, your hair stands on edge, and suddenly you just get this feeling, and that's the communication. It can be very, very simple, and I promise you, very, very subtle. When you ask that question, are you there? Because you're turning within now, and you're asking of your true self to connect with you. And it requires you to not define what it is, but to allow it to be experienced, allow it to be discovered. So as we go forth, we could say that we will allow only that which expresses Christ consciousness. That would be love. We have a choice in every moment to be the expression of love or to be the expression of fear. In this moment, in this moment, in this moment, now. And in this moment, now. We in this group right here are holding a consciousness of love, and we can feel this infinite self within us. It's expansive, and it's beautiful. It's boundless. It's engaging. It's embracing. It's principle. It's truth. And it's experienceable. We only need to listen. We only need to feel. So as we go forth this week, and we see our brothers and sisters out here maybe feeling stressed out from the season, maybe trying to live up to some idealized standard of what we are supposed to be at this time of year or any other time, we might take notice that maybe they just need somebody to be loving. Maybe they just need a smile or a wink or maybe a hug. And given an opportunity to feel through us that we recognize the divinity in them. Because if divinity is in them, it must be in us. And we can only realize it when we see it in our brothers and sisters. And they're everywhere for us to see. I feel blessed to be in the company of these masters, these spiritual alchemists, who are transforming the very world that we live in this space. And any who might be participating in this conversation tonight, you are loved, and I feel your love. And I appreciate you, and I appreciate everyone in this group tonight. And together, we join in this intention of love by simply saying,